Imagine a world where boarding a plane was as casual as stepping onto a bus. No X-ray machines, no metal detectors, no body scans. Just a ticket, a smile, and you were in the sky. Sounds unbelievable today, doesn't it? But back in 1971, this was reality. And it was in this world, this vulnerable, unguarded world, that one man carried out the most daring skyjacking in history. A crime so audacious that it not only stunned America, but changed the very way we travel forever. This is not just a story about stolen money. It's about a ghost who walked onto a plane, vanished into the night, and left behind a trail of questions that remain unanswered to this day. A man the world came to know as D.B. Cooper. Now let me ask you, what do you think is scarier? A man with a gun in a dark alley? Or someone sitting quietly beside you on a plane, holding a bomb and smiling politely as if nothing's wrong? It all began on the afternoon of November 24th, 1971. It was the day before Thanksgiving, and airports were bustling with families rushing to reunite with their loved ones. Among them, a quiet man in his mid-40s purchased a one-way ticket from Portland, Oregon to Seattle, Washington. Nothing unusual. He paid in cash, just $20, and gave his name as Dan Cooper. Later, thanks to a miscommunication in the press, he would forever be remembered as D.B. Cooper. Witnesses described him as polite, well-dressed in a dark suit, white shirt, and a thin black tie. Nothing about him screamed danger. He was the kind of man you'd pass by in an airport without a second thought. But what he carried with him would change history. As the plane took off, Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305, Cooper ordered a bourbon and soda. Calm, composed, blending in like any other passenger. But soon, the mask of normalcy would drop. He handed a small note to a flight attendant, Florence Schaffner. She thought it was just another lonely businessman trying to flirt. Without looking, she slipped it into her pocket. But Cooper leaned toward her and whispered, "Miss, you'd better read that note. I have a bomb." Imagine being in her place. A crowded flight, strangers all around, and suddenly the man sitting next to you claims he's carrying explosives. What would you do? Florence read the note. It was short, to the point, and terrifying. Cooper calmly opened his briefcase to show her. Red cylinders, wires, something that looked like dynamite. Whether it was real or not didn't matter. It looked real enough, and the quiet confidence in his eyes told her he wasn't bluffing. Cooper's demands were clear. $200,000 in cash, 4 parachutes, and a fuel truck standing by in Seattle to refuel the plane. The instructions were chilling but precise. He wasn't reckless, he wasn't ranting, he was in control. As the flight continued towards Seattle, Florence passed the note to the captain. The cockpit crew contacted air traffic control, who immediately informed the FBI. And just like that, an ordinary domestic flight became the stage for one of the boldest crimes in history. For the next few hours, passengers had no idea their lives were hanging in the balance. Cooper insisted they remain calm, and the crew played along, pretending everything was normal. Drinks were served, people chatted. Some even slept, unaware that a hijacker with a bomb was just rows away. On the ground, law enforcement scrambled. Seattle police, the FBI, and airline officials were in a frenzy. Should they meet his demands? Could they risk calling his bluff? One wrong move, and dozens of innocent lives could be lost. In the end, they decided to comply. When the plane landed in Seattle, the passengers were told there would be a slight delay for maintenance. Meanwhile, agents quickly gathered the money, $200,000 in marked bills and 4 parachutes. Everything Cooper asked for. Think about this. In today's world, the moment a hijacker makes demands, SWAT teams, negotiators, and military response units would be involved. Back then, it was a different time. No one had anticipated something like this. The government wasn't prepared, and Cooper knew it. He allowed the passengers to leave once his ransom was delivered, keeping only the flight crew with him. The money and parachutes were handed over. True to his word, he released everyone else. But the story was far from over. In fact, this was just the beginning. With the crew at his mercy, Cooper gave his next command. The plane would take off again, this time heading towards Mexico City, but under his very specific conditions. The aircraft was to fly at a low altitude, 10,000 feet, with the landing gear down and at a slow speed. He wanted the rear stairway extended mid-flight. Why? Because Cooper had a daring plan no one could have predicted. As the plane lifted into the dark, rainy sky, Cooper calmly strapped on one of the parachutes, tied the bag of ransom money around his waist, and prepared for the unimaginable. Somewhere over the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest, he opened the rear stairs. The freezing wind roared through the cabin, and then he jumped. Just like that, D.B. Cooper disappeared into the night. No one saw him land. No one knows where he went. He was gone. But here's the question. Did he survive that leap into the storm? Or did his body end up in some unmarked grave beneath the trees?
The tension inside that Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305 was reaching its peak. Passengers were unaware of the true danger lurking among them. To them, it was just another short flight from Portland to Seattle. A routine trip, hardly enough time to even finish a cocktail. But behind the calm demeanor of the man in seat 18C, a storm was brewing. Dan Cooper, later immortalized as D.B. Cooper after a media mix-up, slipped a note to the flight attendant, Florence Schaffner. At first, she assumed it was just another flirtatious passenger trying his luck. But when she opened it, her heart skipped. In clear, steady handwriting, it read, "Miss, I have a bomb here. I want you to sit beside me." Now, pause for a moment. Imagine being in her shoes. What would you do? Would you scream? Would you try to run? Or would you play along, hoping it was all a bluff? Florence chose composure. She quietly took the seat beside Cooper, her pulse racing as he slowly opened his briefcase. Inside, wires, red cylinders, and a battery pack. Whether it was real or fake didn't matter. The fear it inspired was very real. Calmly, Cooper listed his demands: $200,000 in cash, 4 parachutes, and a fuel truck waiting in Seattle for refueling. Not a single life was to be risked. His message was chillingly clear. And here's the detail that still rattles investigators. Cooper was polite, almost unsettlingly polite. He ordered a bourbon and soda, tipped the stewardesses for their service, and reassured them he wasn't out to hurt anyone. He wasn't chaotic, wasn't reckless. He was in total control. By the time the plane landed in Seattle, the FBI had scrambled to meet his demands. They quickly gathered the ransom, $200,000 in marked bills, and 4 parachutes. Passengers were released unharmed, still unaware of how close they had been to disaster. To them, it was a strange delay. To the world outside, it was a national emergency. Now the spotlight was squarely on Cooper. With the passengers gone, only a handful of crew members remained on board. The stakes had risen higher. The money was delivered. The parachutes were brought aboard. And then Cooper made his boldest move yet. He instructed the pilot to take off again, heading towards Mexico City, but with very specific conditions. Fly under 10,000 feet, keep the speed slow, and leave the rear exit stairs unlocked. Think about that for a second. How many hijackers in history had planned something so precise, so daring? He wasn't just hijacking a plane, he was orchestrating an escape that defied belief. At 8:13 p.m., somewhere over the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest, the rear stairway was lowered. The winds howled, the rain battered against the fuselage, and then he was gone. D.B. Cooper jumped. Into the freezing darkness, carrying $200,000 strapped to his body, armed with nothing but courage and a parachute. And just like that, he vanished into legend. But here's the twist. No one saw him land. No one knows if he survived. And from that night onward, D.B. Cooper became America's most mysterious outlaw.
When the crew finally landed the aircraft safely in Reno, Nevada, Cooper was long gone. What remained were empty bourbon glasses, 2 parachutes left behind, and an open stairway door that whispered of the impossible. The FBI swarmed the scene, determined to find answers. But answers didn't come easy. They scoured the plane for fingerprints, only to find too many partial prints that led nowhere. They collected cigarette butts from Cooper's seat, thinking they held the golden clue. Yet later, unbelievably, those butts were lost in evidence storage. Imagine that, the most critical DNA sample of the case gone forever. Now, pause for a moment. How do you think something like that even happens? Was it incompetence? Or could it have been deliberate? Meanwhile, the search outside was frantic. Helicopters buzzed over the dark forests of Washington state. Ground teams combed the terrain. Divers plunged into rivers. The conditions were brutal. Freezing rain, thick woods, treacherous rivers. Survival seemed nearly impossible. And yet, no body was found, no parachute, no trace. It was as if the man had simply disappeared into thin air. The mystery only deepened when the media got involved. They accidentally misreported Cooper's alias as D.B. Cooper instead of Dan Cooper, and that mistake stuck forever. Overnight, the name D.B. Cooper became a legend, plastered across every newspaper in America. But here's what really shocked investigators. Cooper seemed to know far too much about aviation. He knew the plane's specifications, He knew how to lower the rear stairs mid-flight, and he even dictated the precise altitude and speed needed for a safe jump. Was he ex-military, a disgruntled airline employee, or perhaps something even stranger? The theories came flooding in. Some believed he didn't survive the jump, arguing no one could endure that storm, that altitude with such makeshift equipment. Others swore he had planned it too perfectly to fail. And then, years later, an eerie discovery reignited the mystery. In 1980, a young boy digging near the Columbia River stumbled upon a rotting bundle of cash. It was $5,800 in bills, still bound in the same rubber bands the FBI had used to package the ransom money. The serial numbers matched D.B. Cooper's ransom. But here's the catch. If Cooper had died in the jump, where was the rest of the money? If he had lived, why would thousands of dollars be abandoned in the sand untouched for nearly a decade? This single discovery only raised more questions than answers. And let me ask you, what do you think? Did Cooper misplace some of his cash while escaping? Or could someone else have planted it there to throw investigators off? The FBI chased leads for decades, interviewing hundreds of suspects. But every time they thought they had their man, the evidence fell apart. From ex-military paratroopers to ex-cons bragging in bars, no one could ever be definitively linked to the crime. And yet, the legend grew. Every passing year, D.B. Cooper wasn't just a fugitive, he became a cultural icon. The man who pulled off the perfect crime, who thumbed his nose at authority, and who slipped away into the night without a trace. But behind the fascination lay something much darker. The realization that this heist exposed a terrifying weakness in America's aviation security. Because if Cooper could do it, who else might try?
The D.B. Cooper hijacking wasn't just another crime story. It was a wake-up call, a thunderclap that forced the world to confront just how fragile air travel security really was. Think about it. Before 1971, walking into an airport was like walking into a bus terminal. No metal detectors, no baggage scanners, no ID checks. You could stroll up to the gate minutes before takeoff and board with almost anything in your bag. And Cooper knew this. He exploited a system built entirely on trust. After the hijacking, airlines and the government had no choice. They had to act fast. Within months, airports began rolling out new technology that would change the way millions of people traveled. First came the metal detectors. Passengers now had to walk through screening gates, ensuring no one carried hidden weapons on board. It was a shock to the American public, many of whom complained it was invasive. But the Cooper case had shown the stakes were life and death. Then came X-ray machines for baggage. For the first time, carry-ons and checked bags were subjected to inspection. That meant no more slipping contraband through without detection. And perhaps the biggest change of all, the concept of air marshals gained traction. Armed federal agents began flying undercover, ready to stop any would-be copycats before they could strike. But these changes didn't happen overnight, and at first, the pushback was fierce. People argued that hijackings were rare, that these new rules slowed down travel and felt like an invasion of privacy. So here's a question for you. If you had been flying in the early 1970s, would you have supported stricter security, or would you have seen it as unnecessary government overreach? Regardless of public opinion, the system evolved. Every hijacking attempt after Cooper was met with harsher countermeasures. His bold stunt had forced aviation into a new era of constant vigilance. And yet the man himself remained missing. The FBI's NORJAC investigation, short for Northwest Hijacking, became the longest and most expensive case in Bureau history. But the deeper they dug, the murkier it became. One suspect, Richard McCoy, pulled off a copycat hijacking just months later and parachuted out with $500,000. He was eventually caught, but the FBI couldn't link him to Cooper. Others pointed to an ex-convict named Dwayne Weber, who allegedly confessed on his deathbed. Still, nothing ever stuck. Decade after decade, the case grew colder. In 2016, after nearly 45 years, the FBI officially closed the file, admitting defeat. D.B. Cooper had outlasted them all. And that's where the story becomes more than just crime history. It's legend. Because Cooper didn't just vanish with the money. He forced every single one of us, every traveler, to live with the shadow of his act. Every time you take off your shoes at an airport, every time you walk through a scanner, every time your bag is searched. That's the ghost of D.B. Cooper, the man who disappeared into the storm but left a legacy that reshaped aviation forever. Now here's the haunting question. Do you think he survived the jump and lived out his days in secret wealth? Or did his body lie broken somewhere in the wilderness, his treasure scattered, and his identity lost to the forest?
And so, the D.B. Cooper skyjacking remains the only unsolved hijacking in U.S. history. A crime that ended not with handcuffs, but with a mystery. A man who walked onto a plane with a briefcase full of threats and walked off into legend. Whether he lived or died that stormy night, one thing is undeniable. He changed aviation forever. The security lines we stand in, the scanners we walk through, the checks we grumble about, all of it can be traced back to this one moment in 1971. But here's what makes the story so haunting. Cooper himself never paid the price. It's us, the passengers, who have carried the cost. Every ticket, every checkpoint, every delay is part of the legacy of a man who vanished into the night with $200,000 strapped to his body. So I'll leave you with this question. Was D.B. Cooper a criminal mastermind who beat the system, or just a desperate man whose luck ran out in the storm? Tell me what you think in the comments below, because this is one mystery that still sparks debate half a century later. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to Criminal Codex, and turn on the bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into the world's most chilling mysteries. And remember, some crimes fade into history, but others, like the D.B. Cooper heist, live forever. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.